All right, let's see if anybody can hear me. We can hear me here. Holy cow. Every time. Can't see, there's nobody in Burley yet. Kyle, can you hear me? Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Ripperman.
What's that, Yaslin?
Good morning.
Oh, good morning. Thank you. Good morning to you.
Thank you. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good. All right. So we've got several people on. I'd like to go over a couple of things. And then, honestly, I have taken, since a year ago, I have taken these two chapters and combined them into one chapter. I mean, the book did. The new book that we're using um, took these two chapters and put them together. And that is quite unfortunate because I've got like 5 pages here and I think 10 pages there that I need to get through, but that's not going to happen. So I've highlighted the stuff that I really need you to know. So we're going to do that and we'll go from there. We'll see where it goes. And whatever I don't get to today won't be on the exam. So it won't. I had a professor here, Dr. McKenna, my sociology teacher, and great guy. And he would tell the best stories. But he would get telling stories, and then he would test us on the stuff that he didn't cover in class, and it drove me insane. So my wife last night said, "So are you ready to be able to put this together?" And I said, "Yeah." And she's like, "You're not going to pull a McKenna?" And I was like, "No, I don't think I'm going to do that." So lucky for you all, whatever I don't cover, we're just not going to. We just won't test on. It'll be that simple. No assessment on it. All right. So here we go. Let's share. Let's share this. I think you guys all know this. You've seen it. There isn't any real reason to be showing you week 15. But what we've got here is the rest of this week, right? So I have put up pictures of the Black Death. You've got the Reformation discussion, which is due on Sunday night. This is the Black Plague lecture. This is Wednesday's lecture because after looking back on it, I think that Wednesday's was better than Monday. So if you want to, it's the same material. I just didn't get into a couple of things on Monday because I was too busy pushing nationalism versus patriotism. So this one might be better if you haven't seen it. Okay. With that in mind, next week we will, and I think I told you this all on Wednesday, but I've had something come up on Wednesday, and so I have to cancel class Wednesday. With that in mind, because it's the final, we will review on Monday. If you want to be here on Monday and review, so that you can take the exam on Wednesday, because the exam will still open Wednesday. If you want to be here on Monday, then come Monday. You can be prepared. You can take the exam. You could take the exam Wednesday and be done with this class. Okay. Otherwise, I'll be back here on Friday. So no class on Wednesday, back here on Friday for anybody who needs to review before they take the exam. The exam will be open Wednesday to Sunday night. Now, as usual, if you need some extra time, I obviously have built in a little bit of time, but I can't push it out any farther than the following Wednesday. What let's see, I just to give you the actual date. What date is that? So I cannot push it out any farther than the 16th. Right now, the exam closes on the 13th. Okay. So with that in mind, it closes on the 13th. I could push it to Monday. Monday is technically the day that we would have the final in this course. And so you're more than welcome to, if you need Monday, great. I just want to make sure that the most amount of people could take it before finals week so that they didn't need to be, you don't need to be worrying about this class during finals week. This would be one thing off your plate. You wouldn't have to worry about it. Okay. That is my hope. So Monday review, no class Wednesday, review on Friday. Okay. That's the idea for next week. Okay. With that, I can stop sharing for a moment. So let's get into the things that I actually need you to know for the final exam. Okay. As we move into medieval Europe, and we're talking pre-12th century, you're seeing fragmented feudal societies, agricultural economies, right? But as the Renaissance starts to take place in the 14th century, we start to see political centralization, national feelings, right? Nationalistic, we talked about that Monday and Wednesday. Urban and commercial capitalist economies, okay? And then this growing control, growing lay secular control. That growing lay and secular control is going to lead to the Reformation, okay? So it's that Renaissance piece, which is why I need you to kind of understand what's going on in the Renaissance in order to get us to the Reformation. Really, the biggest piece is the Renaissance starts in Italy in 1375. We really believe that the Renaissance period is 1375 to 1527. There's several different things there, but really let's talk about the major pieces. Humanism. Humanism is a major piece of the Renaissance. We've got scholarly study of Greek and Latin classics. Okay. Church fathers believed that if we could focus on the old world values, that things would be better, right? This is not any different than we believe today, right? We're always like, well, 50 years ago, X, right? It would have been better if it was 50 years ago. People treated people better. Look, it's always been the same. It's always been the same. And we're the ones who always have this idea of the golden age era, okay? We have this golden age mentality where we like to look back and say it was better. And that's exactly what's going on here. And so they start to turn to Greek and Latin classics. Now, had these religious bishops, fathers, church elders, had they known that turning to the Greek and Latin classics was going to lead to the Reformation, they may not have done it, right? That's not what they wanted to do. What they thought was that it would really promote this idea of classical values, okay? So this advocates for the study of humanist education, which is liberal arts study, right? Grammar, rhetoric, poetry, history, politics, and philosophy, right? So it's really this idea of critical thinking. It's getting you to think beyond yourself. It's thinking beyond the mundane, the day-to-day, and humanism is to celebrate the dignity of humankind and prepare for life, a life with virtuous action, okay? A life where you are looking for experiences that are going to help you be a better human, okay? That was the idea. Italian humanists sought out manuscripts, collections, making volumes of Greek and Latin available to all people, okay? So they started translating that from Greek and Latin into something that everybody else could read. This led to the revival of Greek studies, so educational reforms, guided ideals of useful education, well-rounded person, right? This idea of you're going to study all of these things. And yeah, there are these skills that you're going to need, but if you are in the higher hierarchy, right, in the upper echelons, you're going to go to school and you're going to learn Latin, Greek, you're going to read poetry, you're going to find out history, you're going to do philosophy and politics so that you can be a more well-rounded person, okay? And this has ebbed and flowed through time, but this is really the start of this idea, the humanist era, and looking at Greek revival, right, which is the Renaissance. Okay. There's this idea of Platoism, which is a flattering view of human reason as part of the ideal or the eternal world, and Jesus, or the idea of the religious world. So you're getting this like melding of the two. Okay. With that, you start to get Renaissance art, which is Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael. Let's share this one first. So obviously we all know the Mona Lisa, right? But it's this idea of like looking at the person, right? We're looking at the person in nature. We're looking at the human body. A lot of times we see, and I think I said this back when we talked about Greece and Rome, that we have this idea that Renaissance artists were trying to match what was going on in Greece and Rome, and that's actually not accurate. They were giving you a portrayal of what they thought was Greece and Rome. They actually weren't doing the actual thing, okay? So for instance, when we talk about different statues, a lot of the art that we have, you can see if it's Renaissance or if it's Greek or Roman art by the way that they paint it, okay? So in sculpture, we'll get a sculpture today, and if there's paint on it, it's probably Greek or Roman, okay? If it is alabaster white, it is white, it's marble, it's whatever, it's probably Renaissance. And the reason why is because they're looking back to this idea of this is what perfection is, okay? But the Renaissance were trying to model what was going on in Greece and Rome, and they didn't quite get it, actually. They're a little off, but we can still see this idea of the humanistic body, okay, what we're looking for. Let's do, obviously, one of the most famous, right, Michelangelo, okay? This is the idea of really the human body and this idea of the eternal world and the world that we're currently living in, right? This melding of the two. And that's what the Renaissance is really all about, okay? So you can see, I mean, this is obviously David and God coming together, but it really gives you this idea of back and forth, right? The melding of where I'm at in reality or in relationship to God and back and forth, which church leaders in the beginning were like, this is great. This is exactly what we're looking for, right? We're looking for people to see how they're connected to God, okay? Okay. This leads to a lot of thinking, right? And that's exactly what happens when we're talking about doing this, especially with church leaders, is that this is a great idea in the beginning. Let's look at the human body. Let's look at humanistic ways of knowing, right? We're looking at these ways that we fit as humans in this broader picture. That leads to the Gutenberg Bible, right? So we have the printing press with movable type. We've had printing presses before, but not with removable type that makes it so easy to print things. Prior to this, you would have monks that were writing the Bible, literally writing the Bible, and then they would be giving these Bibles out. And because it was so slow, you're talking only church leaders had the Bible, and then they were interpreting it and giving it to you what they thought, right? But then we get the Gutenberg Bible, which I can show you that too. I usually have. Let's do this one. Okay, so you've got the Gutenberg Bible, which is awesome in that it is ornately drawn on afterwards, right? The type would have been, so the type here all would have been pressed with the printing press, and then you would have had monks that would have come in and done this extra stuff, which these are phenomenal, okay? By 1500, the printing press is running more than 200 copies, or running in 200 cities in Europe, and they're printing off Bibles at a phenomenal rate. This is going to lead to a lot of problems, right? Church leaders are like, this is great. People have a Bible in there. They're already not questioning, that's a Freudian slip. They're already thinking about their relationship with God. And so this is going to be great. And instead, what it does is it pushes people to start to interpret the Bible for themselves instead of having people listen to their religious leaders. Okay. So the printing press is a big deal. The printing press, not that you need to talk about the printing press, but there's a question about the Reformation, and you could potentially talk about the printing press as being one of those things that leads up to the Reformation, right? I mean, that's what pushes these different things. Just because, and I know I don't have a lot of time, but just because he is a product of the Renaissance, Niccolo Machiavelli is one of my all-time favorite people. Like, honestly, the guy is amazing. He's not. If you've read The Prince, he comes up with this idea. He's Italian, lives 1469 to 1570 or 1527. But his whole idea with The Prince is that you've got to be a benevolent leader. You have to gain control by any means necessary. Now, that phrase is actually attributed to Machiavelli in The Prince, by any means necessary, but he actually didn't say it. It's actually not in the Prince. Okay, but most people attribute it to him. It is what he's trying to say. That look, you got to take control. And so the Prince is this idea. He's writing to the aristocracy, and he's like, look, if you want to make sure that you're in control, one of the best ways that you can do that is by gaining control any way that you possibly can. And so it really is this outline of, you need to take over, which means that if you need to be fraudulent, if you need to be strong-handed, you do that so that you can get into power, so that you will be a benevolent leader, because you know that you will be a great leader. The problem is that near the end of The Prince, he also starts to say, I know you're going to be a benevolent leader, but now you got to think about how you're going to stay in power, right? And Machiavelli is one of these guys that most political scientists, I mean, we all have to read him, and then you start to see what's going on in our contemporary political spectrum and think, oh, everybody's read The Prince. Like, obviously everybody's read The Prince in the way that they act currently, right? Anyway, Machiavelli. If you haven't heard about him, you should look him up. I usually have a picture of Machiavelli, but you're not missing anything. All right, so let's move on to Reformation. So we're seeing this through the Renaissance. We're seeing this social and political conflict start to arise, right? So during the Renaissance, we're seeing different groups that seem to be this old group that's about values, and this younger group that's starting to think, hey, wait a second, like, I like these teachings of Greek philosophers. I like the Roman art, right? I like these things. I like thinking about myself in connection with the broader world. I like thinking about myself in my relationship with God, and maybe I don't need to go to church, right? So we start to see some reforms, okay? And this is where we get the beginning of the Reformation. We start to see popular religious movements and criticism of the church. Now, there had been criticism prior to this. I can't see you guys, so I'm going to stop this so I can see at least Kyle. He's the only one on there. But we've seen some criticism, but never to this extent. This criticism is going to lead to reform in the church. And when we talk about church, I'm talking specifically the Catholic Church, right? So Reformation couldn't happen earlier due to these changes. We needed these changes. So the Avignon papacy, right? These are the anti-popes. There are 4 or 5 things that go on here. In 1309, you have 7 popes that live in Avignon instead of Rome. Okay, that causes an issue. And it's from 1309 to 1376. Not all 7 of them are there at one time. Okay, we're going to get to that though. In 1378, you get the Great Schism, where 3 men claim to be the Pope. And honestly, Catholics are like, well, I mean, they all pick their favorite Pope, right? And they're wondering like, who's going to be what? But this causes problems because people are like, well, wait a second. This guy claims to be Pope and this guy claims to be Pope. I don't understand what's going on here, which that causes a major issue. Okay. The conciliar period. This is the final authority in spiritual matters, resides with the church and not the Pope. So this is a great period where the church is really having an issue in trying to define where the authority lies. Some people are saying that it lies with the Pope, but most people are saying, no, it doesn't lie with the Pope. It lies with the church. Now, the reason that happens is that the Pope has done things leading up to this period. You've got the 3 popes claiming to be Pope. You have the Crusades, right? You have multiple things that happen throughout time that now people are looking and saying, well, wait a second, does this guy really speak for God? Like, I'm not certain that he does. And so you start to get this questioning. Then we get to the Renaissance papacy, okay? And this is that the temporal role of the Pope starts to grow. The Pope starts to play a bigger role in contemporary society and less in religious society, meaning that he's more of a figurehead to the church than actually doing anything for the church, or so we believe, right? From that period, we see that there are no popes from the Renaissance period that have been canonized as saints at this point. Still, to this day, no popes from the Renaissance period. And the problem is because they're not pushing the idea of religion, they're pushing contemporary ideas, they're pushing, they're being this figurehead out in the public, right? Okay. So that, along with many people start to see that the church is not equal and they want a more egalitarian church. And that criticism starts to break down into the Reformation. Okay. We start to see lay control over religious life. This stuff starts to get what I think some people thinking that we have a similar problem in religion today. But the benefice system is the sale of religious offices to the highest bidder. Parishioners at the bottom are like, wait a second, you mean I can just sell, this leader can just sell his leadership to somebody else? Like, it's not about God telling them? And that frustrates people at the bottom, right? They believe you can't tell a group of people that you were put into place by God and then sell that leadership to somebody else and still have them believe. I mean, some people still believe, but for the most part, people don't, and they get frustrated with that. Communities start to loudly protest financial and spiritual abuses, such as the sale of indulgences. Indulgences are one of my favorite things, okay? Indulgences are this idea that you can sell or you can buy forgiveness. So you're paying money in to gain forgiveness. Let's see, where do we want to go with this? A priest could absolve a penitent of guilt if you had enough money. Now, the problem with this is that poor people at the bottom didn't have enough money to be able to pay, but richer people did. So meaning that you could go out and there's a little there's a cartoon from the time that I'll put it up because it is really good, but it is a character of an indulgent preacher who is taking money from a parishioner who's going to go out and have a great weekend. So he's paying for his sins beforehand. He's like, hey, I'm going to have a great weekend. Here's like 5 shillings. I'm out. And then he can go out and do whatever he wants. And it gets out of control. Okay. Starting in 1343, the church starts selling letters of indulgences. So you could go to your preacher and give money to your preacher. He'd give you a letter, and then you could just run amok through the weekend and then come back and be like, yeah, here's this letter. I'm going to turn it back in, and we're all forgiven, right? By this time, by when is it? In 1517, by the latest, by 1517, we start to see that indulgences are being paid for by small cash payments. Okay. This is what leads to Martin Luther, right? Martin Luther sees indulgences as the worst of Christianity and of the Catholic Church. Okay. So Martin Luther is a religious force in the 16th century. Okay. He's from Germany, and medieval Germany lacks unity at this point, political unity. There's discontent growing within the church, and Martin Luther sees this critique that's going on. Now, he was ordained to the priesthood in 1507. In 1510, he visits Rome, and he sends some complaints back to the church saying, hey, I'm hearing all of these things that are going on within the church, and I've seen it happening, and I'm not really happy about these things. I think that I agree with some of these criticisms. And the church comes out and says, hey, we're taking care of those things. Don't worry about it. It isn't a big deal. And so he kind of backs away. That's 1510. In 1512, he earns his doctorate in theology. And now he starts to see that things are not changing. Okay. Luther is plagued by a discontent between his own sinfulness as a perfect righteousness that God requires for salvation. So he believes that as he's reading the Bible, that he can see that he is commanded to be perfect. And he says, I don't understand how I can reconcile the two between being perfect, this godly perfect that I'm supposed to be, and the sinful state that I'm in. Okay. He concludes that God does not demand charitable acts or religious ceremonies. So he's saying, look, I don't have to give of myself, or nor do I have to go to church to be able to have salvation. Okay. He says we only have to have faith in Jesus Christ as perfect righteousness, and good works are expected, but you don't need works for salvation. And the church freaks out, right? The Catholic Church is not happy. But when it comes down to indulgences in 1517, Martin Luther loses it. And he writes his 95 Theses, right? We all should know about this. He writes about his 95 Theses, and he tacks it to the church door. The 95 Theses was against the impression that indulgences remitted sin, okay? Which made it seem as though salvation was bought and sold. Martin Luther starts the Reformation. I mean, the Reformation starts before that. I hope that you get that, right? There's all of these things that are leading up to it. And historians, especially in high school history, or when we get to this point, right, you start with Martin Luther. He kicks off the Reformation. It actually started much earlier with all of the anti-popes before that. But it's these ideas that get him to tack the 95 Theses to the door. And that is where we get this idea of the Reformation. Okay. The 95 Theses were embraced by humanists, because humanists are like, yeah, I see the same thing. I see that I don't have to go to church. Fun fact, when we go back to Muslims or Islam, right, you've got the two major factions, right, that are very traditional. But Sufism is this idea that I don't have to go to church. Like, all of these religions have this piece where all of a sudden you start to see people being like breaking off, being like, I don't know if I like that. I don't know if you've seen today, but we're seeing a lot of younger generations, starting with millennials down to Gen Z, that are leaving churches. And it's not like their belief in God is going away, but they're leaving churches at a much higher rate. It's happening again. It ebbs and flows throughout history. It's not anything to really be concerned about. It just is this idea that you get into a place where you're like, I don't know if these people speak for me. Luther thinks the same thing, okay? He sees it as, and the humanists do as well, that these older men are telling them how to believe and that they don't need to believe that way. They can believe how they feel. They've got the Bible in front of them. They can go out into nature and they can feel God there. And so they continue to push through that way, okay? Luther is called before a general order. He has to answer for his criticisms. As sanctions were being prepared against him, Emperor Maximilian I dies in 1519. Okay, this kind of does away with this court that Luther is going to go to, right? Charles I of Spain succeeds his grandfather and becomes Emperor Charles V, and he picks that back up. Okay, Luther debates John Eck. He questions the infallibility of the Pope. That is probably a bad idea for Luther, okay? You should never question the fallibility of your leader. I'm just kidding. We probably always should. We should always be looking for that. And that's what Luther's doing. But Charles V is not happy about that. But Luther appeals to authority of Scripture alone. He believes that you don't need somebody to tell you what the Bible says. You have it in front of you. Just read it. These views are published in 1520, and Luther is immediately excommunicated. Okay? Luther is excommunicated in 1520. Then we have the Diet of Worms. The Diet of Worms is an assembly for across the whole empire. So this brings in a bunch of religious leaders to talk about what they can do. They're supposed to preside over what's presided over by Charles V, but they're trying to figure out what to do with Luther. Luther presents his views and was placed under an imperial ban. He is banned from the empire. Like he cannot be, he is supposed to be kicked out. Now, Luther doesn't know after he leaves the Diet of Worms that he's going to be killed. He has no idea, but there's an insider, okay? Elector Frederick. Frederick was Pope Leo X's candidate for the Holy Roman Emperor in 1519. He collected religious relics that he kept in his castle, okay? He boasted an inventory of over 17,000 religious artifacts. Most notably, these are some of my favorite. Most notably, he said that he had a thumb, the thumb of St. Anne. He believed that he had a twig from Moses' burning bush. He said that he had hay from the holy manger. And my personal favorite, he said that he had breast milk from the Virgin Mary that he kept in a vial. So, Elector Frederick is phenomenal, and he thinks, I got to protect this Luther guy. Okay, so he leaves the Diet of Worms, and he runs out, and he knows that a few miles ahead, Luther is going to be overtaken by a group of guys who are going to kill him. So he instead stages a highway attack on Luther, and then a few miles before, and then runs him back to his castle where he keeps him there until where he goes into hiding. Luther goes into hiding. Okay. Anyway, you don't need to know any of those things. I just find it fascinating. I think that it's this idea of the breast milk from the Virgin Mary. Honestly, so you're talking about what 1,500-year-old milk? Like I don't even. And how did we get like it's just fascinating. Whatever. Twig from the burning bush. I'm gonna say I have that. I think I bought it the other day. I found it. Anyway, okay. Yeah, no, this Elector Frederick is awesome. Okay. So we start to get the spread of Reformation. Okay, the emperor was distracted by war with the French and the Turks. This permits local princes to enforce a ban, essentially giving each religious authority his own domain. Okay, So the idea is that because a war is going on, each religious parish has their own their own authority to run the church as they see fit. That's a bad idea, right? So many cities, princes begin to enact religious reforms, and they welcome Lutheran preachers. The Elector of Saxony and the prince both instated Protestantism in their lands. And by 1530, German Protestant lands formed this huge league and prepared for war with the emperor. Okay. What we start to see is that as more and more people start to look at these reforms, they're like, yeah, you know what? I think that maybe the Catholic Church isn't right. Now, one thing that I probably haven't done a very good job of explaining is that the Catholic Church is the only church. Okay, that is the only church. There isn't another church. The Catholic Church, that's it. So this reform is not a reform on different religious ideas. It's actually promoting different religious ideas. So you've got the Catholic Church, and as the Reformation, we start to get Protestant churches coming out of that, right? Reformed churches based off of Catholicism, maybe new religions that aren't based on Catholicism, whatever, but they're growing outside of that. That leads us to John Calvin, born in France and educated by the church. In May of 1534, he joins the Reformation. Okay, Calvin, he sees this political revolt and religious reform in Geneva, and in the late 1520s, Genevans revolt, and in 1536 they officially adopt the Reformation. Okay, Calvin arrives in Geneva in 1536. He drew up articles for the governance of the church, which were approved after much debate in 1537. Okay, so here's what Calvin decides to do in Geneva. He lays out what the church will look like going forward. Protestant churches, but the Catholic Church takes on some of these pieces as well, and I'll show you in a minute. Hopefully we're going to get there. The church is organized into 4 offices. He has them first as in pastors, then teachers to instruct the populace, then lay elders or lay people chosen by the council, and then deacons to dispense church goods and services to the poor, right? So you've got pastors at the top, then teachers, then these lay elders underneath those teachers, and then deacons at the bottom that are dispensing goods and services, okay? His biggest thing, Calvin's biggest thing, is that this idea of predestination, okay? The doctrine that only a chosen few are saved by God's grace alone without regard to acts of faith. So he's saying this idea of preordination, that did not exist prior to Calvin. Calvin is the one who started pushing this idea that the new reforms were going to be about church leadership and the line of authority, and then this idea of preordination or preordained, predestination, that before you were born, God had destined you to do something great. Okay. I think most times in this class in the past, I've heard multiple times that this was something that was going on prior to this time. It's not. It is not something that was going on prior to this time. This was not an idea of the church. It might be a central idea to your religious views now, but it wasn't prior to 1537. Okay. We start to see expansion. German Lutherans formed different religious bodies throughout Germany. The Reformation spreads to Denmark and Sweden and inroads into Poland, okay, by 1540. English Reformation, look, the English are already questioning what's going on in the Catholic Church. And so when Protestants come in, they're like, oh yeah, we totally agree with this. And so Protestantism starts to take off throughout England, okay? Under Henry VIII, and another, I usually play Herman's Hermits, Henry VIII, right? Anyway, you guys don't know that. You guys are all too young to know Henry VIII, except for maybe Kyle. Kyle's old enough. Anyway, we start to see Henry VIII and the Reformation Parliament. The Parliament convened for a 7-year session, okay? And they start to come up with, I'm trying to figure out what actually we need to know here. The Act of Supremacy that declared Henry VIII the only supreme head of the Church of England. And this starts a whole big deal, right? Like, instead of the Catholic Church, we're going to have the Church of England. It's an Anglican church. It's the first time that we start to see this. And despite these changes, Henry did not make any concession to Protestant sensibilities. So he basically says, look, we're going to reform the Catholic Church and we're going to have the Church of England, but it's not going to be Protestant. It's actually going to be Catholic, but now I can just divorce who I want. Okay. That's really what happens. There's also at this time counter reformations. Catholics begin making efforts at reforming. Mostly they're squashed during this time. New religious orders begin to form. The Jesuits are one of these. There is a fascinating podcast, Revisionist History by Malcolm Gladwell, that talk about the Jesuits in the United States at the beginning, the founding of our country. And it's fascinating if you're interested. Really good, actually. Okay. Leads us to where we need to be. So this leads us to the Council of Trent. The Council of Trent, the success of the Reformation forces the church, the Catholic Church, to then decide what they need to do. Okay. They come together, the Council of Trent, and the council was strictly under the Pope's control. Bishops needed to, he decides. So the Pope comes down and says, look, bishops need to preach regularly and spend time in their own diocese. This was an issue. You had a lot of different preachers that were going out and preaching at other places. I told you a couple weeks, or maybe it was just last week, but a couple weeks ago, whenever that these parishes, if you were preaching in a wealthy parish, you got more money. And so you start to see a lot of these preachers going out and trying to preach as like visiting preachers so that they could gain more money so that they could sustain life. And the Pope is like, look, that's not the way to do it. You have to stay in the parish that you're at or the diocese. Priests were also required to dress neatly and be educated and strictly celibate. Okay. This obviously, well, we've got some evidence, but this tells us that that's not going on, right? That these priests are not dressing in a manner becoming a priest, that they are not strictly celibate, and they hadn't been educated. Whether that's actually going and getting formal education or whether that's studying themselves, they needed to be educated, okay? Now, there are no doctrinal concessions that are made to the Protestants in the Catholic Church. Instead, what the Council of Trent does is it reaffirms key doctrines. Those key doctrines are the role of good works. Okay, so you need good works in order to have salvation. The authority of tradition, this idea of traditional values, right? This idea of traditional line of authority. It goes up through the priests to the Pope, okay? And they reaffirmed indulgences at the Council of Trent. With that in mind, Catholics start to think, I mean, these are lowly Catholics. Well, geez, I got no way to succeed in this religion, right? The Reformation has a profound effect on education as it starts to push people to think for themselves. Why do I care? In the last 5 minutes, why should you care? Without the Protestant Reformation, we're all not here today. Okay? Without the Protestant Reformation, we don't exist. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we don't exist, but we're not here. This country may look different. But the Protestant Reformation is what pushes Protestant religions to then move across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States. Okay? We start to see a second Great Awakening in the United States because of this idea of being able to think for ourselves. it pushes people to seek new ideas, new ways of thinking. It pushes that idea. And I would argue that the United States and our idea of individuality is really beginning with the Reformation. Right? The Reformation is what gets us thinking about our relationship to God and nature. It's what gets us thinking about these ideals. If you, which I often have fights, and I don't know who is and who's not. I don't really care to know who is and who's not. But if you are LDS or grew up or your family was in that, you are definitely a product of the Reformation. Without that, that doesn't happen. Without that, Joseph Smith doesn't get to do what he does, okay, or what he says he does. If you are any other religion outside of Catholicism, your religion doesn't exist without the Reformation. Catholics, your religion doesn't exist the way it does today without the Reformation. The Reformation is key. The Reformation is what brings us to this continent. It's what continues to push our individuality, I would argue. Okay. So in writing a paper, there is a question about the Reformation, and that doesn't need to be your significant piece. You can write significance, whatever you want to write on. But mine would be that without the Reformation, I would not be here today. Right? The Reformation is so significant to the United States and the buildup of this country. It's what gives our leaders this political ideology to think for themselves and to create a democracy, this republic that we live in, right? It's this idea of moving to the West and westward expansion, manifest destiny, right? It's those ideas, our relationship with God and nature and being on the periphery, being in the frontier. It's this idea of Mormons pushing westward. It's this idea of us going to Oregon and building up a civilization that can be coast to coast. It's the gold rush, right? This idea of bigger things. Prior to this, we're sitting in churches, listening to people tell us, and then we're going home and working on our farms. That's what we're doing. And that still exists, right? But this is different. Once the Reformation happens, it sparks this light in people that are like, I can think for myself. We'd seen some of that before, but never in the lower social hierarchy. The lower social hierarchy doesn't have that spark, but it's the Reformation and religion at the bottom that pushes those ideals. Okay. There is a lot that I missed, that I was trying to figure out what to keep and what not to. You will not be tested on that. Obviously, the things that you will be tested on is the Reformation, the plague. We'll go over it next week. If you get a chance, please log in and do your course evaluations. I'd appreciate that. If you haven't enrolled in classes in the spring, do that. I've got 2 that I'm teaching online. They're both online. But honestly, if you have not taken an online class before because you're nervous, they're exactly like this. There isn't anything different. You've seen how the class is. I'd love to have you in class either 112, which is the second half of U.S. history. That is Reconstruction to the present. Or 102, which is the second half of this course. Okay. With that being said, I think it's been a good semester. It's been a weird semester, and I couldn't get out to Haley because they're closed. I didn't go to Burley because we couldn't figure out how to make it work back and forth, and it's just been a weird semester, and I apologize. I hope that you all can see that. I appreciate you sticking with me through the whole thing. We'll review on Monday. We won't be here Wednesday. We'll review on Friday. If you all showed up on Monday and then started taking the exam on Wednesday, that would be fine with me. If you want to, if you don't feel safe, and you think a lot of people are going to show up Monday, then show up Friday. Okay. I don't really care. It's whatever you think is best, but they're review days, Monday and Friday. We're not here Wednesday. I hope that you all have a great weekend. It's good to see you all. If you need anything, give me a call. Stop by my office, email me. I'll catch you all later. See you, Kyle. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Ripperman. Have a
you.
nice day.
You too.